In our psalm today that we just read now, we read, "To you I lift up my eyes, O you who are enthroned in the heavens." May we lift up our eyes to the one enthroned in the heavens above us. Amen. I would like to dedicate my message or our reflections today to Sherry O'Brien. For a number of years, she led us in a lectionary series, study of lectionary texts. And we met once a month, and on that one evening of the month, we had the assignment and task of looking at all the lectionary readings, that is, the readings that were assigned for each of the Sundays in that coming month. We just met once a month, and one evening. And what we were trying to do was to look at what the texts for that Sunday, a given Sunday, meant, what those texts would mean to us, how some church leaders back when had seen fit to put those particular texts together for one Sunday, and how to make sense of them together. Was there anywhere a golden thread among them? Well, you can imagine that discussion, and Otto was with us too, and would bring in the history of all of these things in the back, back there, and so we didn't always get to agree on what sermon topic we would choose for a particular Sunday. But if you think of that kind of context, and the text that we just read today, it's a bit of a challenge. We have an Old Testament reading from a prophet, Ezekiel. And Ezekiel was writing or speaking in Babylon, way over there to the east someplace, in deportation. He'd been deported from Israel with the leading people of the king and his wives and all the elite citizens at that particular time. So it was a first deportation that he was part of. And then we had the epistle we read, and that's Paul, the apostle, now writing to this young church in Corinth. And Corinth is over there in the Greek world. And they're in the middle of between the sea, and where all kinds of things are happening in Corinth. And Apostle Paul is kind of upset about all of that. And then we come to the gospel, and here's Jesus going back to his hometown, Nazareth. Well, let's think just briefly, quickly, because we don't have, all evening. Ezekiel is a prophet of the Old Testament. He's speaking on the banks of the river Kedar, maybe not a river, a canal that went through Babylon at that time. His king, and as I said, the wives of the king, they've all been deported to Babylon. And then here's Ezekiel, and the heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God. And he said to me, "O mortal, stand on your feet, and I will speak with you." That's just the beginning of Ezekiel that we didn't read. What we did read was, "And a spirit entered into me and set me on my feet, and I heard him speaking to me." This is God speaking to Ezekiel. And he's telling Ezekiel to say something to this rebellious house of Israel that simply will not follow the commandments, that simply will not follow the covenant that I've set for them. They've transgressed to this very day, and now you're here in Babylon, and they still won't change back there. And as we know, another deportation came, and all the rest of the people were taken away, and what was left was the people who became the Samaritans. So Ezekiel is warned, you're among thorns and briars and scorpions, but don't let it worry you. Like it or not, they'll know that there was a prophet among them. Then we come to Apostle Paul, and he was kind of upset with what was going on among the Corinthians. He just had to escape from Damascus, remember being dropped over the side of the wall in a basket and run away. And now he's trying to write to the Corinthians and sort of straighten them out, and he's talking about false apostles that are among them. He doesn't like that too well. He says he could boast about lots of things. In fact, he knows a person who was caught up to heaven a few years ago, way up to the third heaven, in fact. In fact, this guy was caught up to paradise. And whether, well, only God knows what was true. But anyway, that's the story, and I could boast too. But and I've had some revelations too, and in fact, exceptional revelations that I could talk about. But he says, then this thorn got me, a thorn in my flesh, and it really bothers. And I tried to, ask God several times. 1, 2, 3, God, take this thorn away from my flesh. And God just doesn't answer that prayer at all. In fact, God just tells me my grace is sufficient, and you carry on from there. So he has to carry on under these difficult circumstances. Then we come to the gospel text. And that follows on from last Sunday, where Jesus was healing a woman from suffering that she'd had, bringing her back to life in the community. He raised up this little girl from death to bring her into her life that would be there ahead of her all her life. And so he comes back home to Nazareth. Now, Nazareth was just a little village. Some estimate that it was 500 people maybe. Otto, again, if you were here, would tell us that, well, that's not quite what Nazareth was. Actually, it was an important trade route, and so there was lots going through Nazareth. Well, in any case, Jesus went back there to Nazareth, and they had a synagogue. So you might think that, well, a village that has a synagogue, that's an important place, and that's where they gathered on the Sabbath to worship. But again, a synagogue, they might not all be built of stone and rock and so on and so forth. It might be just the corner of a house. It might be just a wall, kind of beside a wall someplace. It might even be just outside where the people would meet to gather and talk about village affairs. So it was a fairly simple sort of place. But it was a place where they met. And so Jesus was teaching there in his home village. They seemed to know that he was a master, that he was a teacher. They didn't call him Rabbi here or Rabboni, which would be a really honorable title for him. But they were impressed by what he was saying. In fact, they were so impressed that they were astonished. And they started to talk and ask questions and try to figure out who this man really was. And where did he get all this? Where did all of this come from that he's giving us? What is the source of his teaching? What is this wisdom? Now, if you remember, this is the Greek world. If they had people going through, they were talking about wisdom. Even the ancient Israelites talked about wisdom. So these people in the small village knew something about wisdom, but it should be anyway. And what's this wisdom that this man is bringing to us? And then we see these deeds that he's doing with his carpenter hands. Wonderful deeds. Deeds of power. And they wonder, who is he? What is his identity? Well, we knew him. He grew up here. He's the son of Mary. This is like we say in Africa, the son of so-and-so. You know who somebody is because of their family. So they know the son of Mary. And Joseph isn't mentioned here. Matthew actually says about the son of the father, the carpenter now. But here it's only Mary who's mentioned. But all the brothers, and they throw in the sisters too and say, we know the whole family. And so they were upset. In fact, they took offense at him. I Did you catch that when we read it? They took offense at him. What did this mean? They were offended. This hometown boy, this just isn't the way things are supposed to be. And so they took offense. The word literally means they stumbled. They're thinking, they couldn't figure out what made sense, what was going on, what the source of this man's power was, and the deeds that he was performing among them. And so they stumbled over him. They didn't, in fact, they had contempt then for this young village boy who had now come back to them. And now Mark reports what Jesus says to them. He says to them, prophets are not without honor except in their hometown, and among their own kin, and in their own house. Now, this reminds us might make us think of the Old Testament. He must be quoting something in the Old Testament. It sounds like an Old Testament text. And remember, we've just heard Ezekiel, where the word is saying, they will know a prophet has been among them. Is that what Jesus had in the back of his mind as he was saying that? We don't know. Certainly there was a prophecy there, and now here we see kind of fulfillment. Prophets are not without honor except in their hometown. So that's all we hear of Jesus' reaction to his reception by his own people. That's all Mark tells us, except that Jesus' reaction, except what happened. He could do no deed of power there, except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and cured them. Jesus was powerless. At least his power was very limited. He only did a little bit of what he really could have done. And then Mark adds these surprising words about Jesus. Jesus' emotions. Mark says, and he was amazed at their unbelief. This is Jesus. Jesus was amazed at the unbelief. He could have been angry, he could have been upset, he could have been everything else. Jesus was amazed. We believe that Scripture is inspired. We believe that the writers were inspired in writing. What was Mark thinking when he made that remark? Jesus was amazed at their unbelief. And then he just goes on to say, he was amazed at their unbelief. Then he went about among the villages teaching, and he called the 12 and sent them out 2 by 2 to witness and so on through the villages. Some of your Bibles would have a break there and say this is a new heading, and they divide that verse 6 in 2 and say the second part here is about a whole new ministry. That's not how it really was written. It was simply written, he was amazed at their unbelief, and then he went about among the villages around Nazareth teaching. We could go on there to the whole second part and talk about the mission of the 12. It could be a whole second part of the sermon, but we don't have the time that we had in the evenings with Sherry. So we'll stop there. Jesus was amazed. Why was he amazed at their unbelief? How was he amazed? Why was he disappointed? What was he disappointed in? And what did he do? He went to the villages. He sent his disciples out with the message, and they carried on. So sometimes we're discouraged, we're dismayed, we're amazed at something that just doesn't make sense that we see in our lives, in the lives of others around us, in our families, in our community. Dismayed, disappointed, weighed down by a thorn. Even Jesus was amazed at their unbelief. Sometimes we, like the Apostle Paul, need to be reminded that his grace is sufficient for us. truly we know that it is by His grace. And I'd just like to say a word of thanks to Pastor, to congregation, for the opportunity these 3 weeks to serve with you and to share with you in the ministry of the Lord. It's truly been a blessing. God bless us. Thank you.